All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We all crave knowledge, right? We want it thoroughly, and let's be honest, we want it now. And that's exactly what we're here for.
You got it.
So today, we're diving headfirst into, a really powerful and timeless story from the Bible. We're talking 1 Kings chapter 17. Get ready for some serious drama, impossible situations, and ultimately a profound message about strengthening faith, like really strengthening faith.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going way back, ancient Israel, a kingdom struggling with spiritual decline under King Ahab.
Right, Ahab.
It's during this time that we see this incredible figure of the prophet Elijah kind of burst onto the scene.
Right.
And our goal today in this deep dive is to unpack some of that timeless wisdom that we find in this chapter and see how it applies to us today. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on how this story can really bolster your trust in God.
Okay, so the story starts off with a bang, right?
Yeah.
Elijah confronts King Ahab with this huge declaration. He's basically saying, hey, get ready for a drought. No dew, no rain for years, except at my word. Like, talk about a power move, right?
I know, right?
What's the significance of this announcement right off the bat?
Well, it sets the stage, right?
Right.
And it establishes the gravity of the situation, not just for Ahab, but for the entire kingdom.
Yeah.
This drought is presented as a direct consequence, a direct message from the Lord, the God of Israel.
Wow.
And following this impactful announcement, God gives Elijah very specific instructions. He tells him, go hide yourself by the brook Cherith.
Okay.
It's near the Jordan River.
Okay, so he's by himself in this isolated place, and then we get this incredible image of God providing for Elijah in this really unexpected way. We're talking ravens, like ravens of all creatures, are bringing him bread and meat morning and evening. And he's drinking from the brook. I mean, that's just such a striking image. What does it tell us that God would use such unusual messengers?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? You have this stark contrast. Ravens, typically we think of them as scavengers, not providers.
Yeah.
So the fact that God commands these birds, these ravens, to bring food to Elijah really highlights the fact that God can work outside of our expectations. He's not limited by conventional means, you know what I mean?
Right.
He could orchestrate provision through, the most unexpected channels.
Yeah.
And it underscores this beautiful truth.
Yeah.
God completely cares for those who trust him. He provides even in the most unexpected ways.
But like anyone who's ever lived through a drought knows, water sources eventually dry up.
Sure.
And even this divinely provided brook, it eventually stops flowing. And it makes you wonder, why would God provide something temporarily? Like, what's the point of that?
That's a great question. And I think the drying up of the brook signals a shift in God's plan. It's a reminder, that even the blessings we receive directly from God, they might be temporary. They serve a purpose for a season and, as part of a bigger story that God's unfolding.
Right, right.
And this leads us to the next stage in the story where the word of the Lord comes to Elijah again.
Okay.
And this time, he's directing Elijah to Zarephath, a town near Zidon. And God's instruction is very clear. I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee.
Okay, so now Elijah goes to this new place, this unfamiliar territory, trusting God to keep providing for him. And this time the provision is going to come through a complete stranger, a widow.
Right.
So he arrives at the city gate and he sees her gathering sticks. And his first request is for some water, which seems pretty reasonable. But then he asks for some bread.
Yeah.
And this is where we start to see just how dire her circumstances really are.
Absolutely. Her response, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
She swears by the Lord her God that she has nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a tiny bit of oil left in a jug.
Wow.
She's gathering these sticks to make one last meal for herself and her son. They're on the brink of starvation.
Yeah, it's the absolute last resort.
Yeah.
And then Elijah makes this request that almost sounds, insensitive maybe. He asks her to first make a small loaf of bread for him before she makes anything for herself or her son.
Right.
What's the reasoning behind that?
This is such a crucial moment in the story.
Yeah.
It's a real test of faith for the widow.
Right.
But it's important to remember Elijah's not being insensitive here. He's acting as God's messenger.
Right.
You see, he follows this seemingly impossible request with an incredible promise. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. He's asking her to trust God, to have faith in a future provision, even though her current reality is one of scarcity.
And amazingly, she does exactly what Elijah asks. I mean, can you imagine that? She uses her last bit of resources to bake bread for him first.
It's a truly remarkable act of trust.
It really is.
And the outcome is exactly as Elijah prophesied. The Bible tells us that the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil, it didn't run dry.
Wow.
And this wasn't a one-time miracle. This was sustained provision. It lasted throughout the entire drought.
Wow.
This story powerfully illustrates that God is faithful. He provides for those who trust and obey him, even when the situation seems utterly hopeless.
I think that part of the story is so powerful because, we all face our own kinds of droughts and times of desperation in our lives. Maybe it's financial, emotional, or something else entirely.
Absolutely.
But the widow's story encourages us to step out in faith, even when things seem impossible, and to trust that God can meet our needs in ways that we could never predict.
Right, to rely on a power greater than ourselves.
But the story takes another turn, doesn't it? A real tragedy strikes.
Yes, it does. After this period of provision, the widow's son becomes very ill, and it's so serious that he actually stops breathing.
Oh, wow.
And her immediate response is this wave of grief, and she cries out to Elijah. And you can feel her fear. She questions why he's there, wondering if his arrival has somehow brought God's judgment upon her, maybe a reminder of some past sin.
It's raw, honest grief and fear.
Yeah.
But then Elijah's response is one of pure compassion. He takes the boy from her arms, carries him to an upper room, and lays him on his own bed.
Yeah.
And what happens next is this powerful example of what we call intercessory prayer, praying to God on behalf of someone else.
Exactly. Elijah pours his heart out to the Lord. He questions why this horrible thing has happened to this woman who showed him such kindness and hospitality.
Right.
And then, in this incredible act of faith, he stretches himself out over the boy 3 times, begging the Lord to restore the child's life.
And does God answer Elijah's prayer?
He does. The Bible says that the Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him. He lived. Just imagine the relief and joy in that moment.
Yeah.
Then Elijah takes the boy back to his mother and simply says, "See, your son is alive."
And what does she say?
Her response is this beautiful declaration of faith. She says, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." She witnessed not only miraculous provision, but also the power of God over life and death.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into 1 Kings 17, it's clear that this story, though ancient, is incredibly relevant for us today.
Absolutely.
It speaks volumes about God's unwavering faithfulness, his power to do the impossible, his care for the vulnerable, and the impact of prayer and obedience in our lives.
It really does.
Yeah.
Think about a time in your own life when you felt completely overwhelmed, when you faced a challenge that felt insurmountable. Maybe you were lacking resources. Maybe you felt lost and alone. How might the lessons we've learned from Elijah and the widow of Zarephath, trusting in God's provision, choosing obedience, embracing the power of prayer, and practicing generosity, how might these principles change your perspective on that experience, or maybe even a challenge you're facing right now?
Right.
Could these principles strengthen your trust in God's plan for your life?
I think they can. And that's something for all of us to consider as we go about our week. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.